Hello everyone, you could have wasted your time wallowing in your own self-loathing, but you decided to waste it with me in my review of Final Fantasy X. That's right, the 10th installment in the iconic long-running franchise. One of the most acclaimed and one of the most beloved, as well as one of the most important entries in the series. Not just for the general gaming populace or the industry as a whole, but for me on a deeply personal level. I can't recall if I've mentioned this or not, but Final Fantasy X was my introduction to the franchise, as well as a genre it's a part of. It's a game that really opened my eyes and changed my perspective on turn-based RPGs and RPGs in general. It's kinda hard to tell what my interests would be had I never given this a shot, because it was, at the time, the only Final Fantasy left on Game Pass. I think. Because this game was a gateway, not just into JRPGs, but Japanese art as a whole. Seeing this in Game Pass and going, why not? Was a slippery slope that led me down the path into JRPGs as well as anime and manga. And as a result, I ended up discovering what has since become some of my favorite pieces of entertainment ever. So yeah, thanks for all of that, Final Fantasy X. But sentimentality aside, Final Fantasy X is something of an oddball within the franchise. It was the first game to incorporate several things that would go on to become franchise staples, not to mention the left hand it took in terms of combat progression. It's definitely an ambitious title, that goes without saying. While most of its experiments really paid off, there were, as much as I hate to admit it, lots of things that I did not enjoy about this game. So much so that I feel conflicted to label it as a true masterpiece.
You hit your head.
Now, don't get me wrong, it's still among the top 5 of the franchise, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend that this game doesn't have some serious fucking issues, and I will address them in due time. But for now, I suppose I'll begin this review by addressing FF10's combat system. This is the thing I felt was important to mention first and foremost, because out of all the things this game did differently, the combat system is by far the biggest example. Goodbye ATB system and hello conditional turn-based system. 10 years and 6 games following the mechanic's introduction, Final Fantasy X would opt for a more traditional battle system, where turn order is clearly visible at all times, and gets a neat little spot in the top right corner of the screen. Nice. In addition to that, this game introduced a never-before-seen mechanic, and that is the ability to freely swap party members during each and every one of your turns. This addition creates a seamlessly dynamic system that allows the player to strategize in ways it couldn't in prior entries. With the ATB-style games from before, time was the main component behind every battle. The player was constantly pressured to maintain the upper hand by disrupting and countering whatever the enemy was throwing at you. And it worked because the game's enemies were well designed around that system. But in Final Fantasy X, it's an entirely different story. There's no pressure to make decisions as quick as you can, and you can quite literally take as long as you need to make your move. Your party may develop severe cramps for standing in their idle positions for too long, but it's nothing that a good massage can't handle. Dibs on Orin. Anywho, this system allows a player to tackle every battle at their own pace. The pressure doesn't lie within time, and as much as it does with using your party's dynamics to their utmost potential with each turn you take. There's a really fun element of strategy to this system, and the way you'll be swapping members left and right in order to make the most out of various situations. The finest moments in Final Fantasy X stem from battles where the solutions to achieving an upper hand weren't immediately obvious. But the more you swapped characters, the more strategies lined up. Like, say you're facing this guy. Looks pretty strong. Won't take much to KO a party member. But instead of brute forcing it, you may want to think about how you're going to bring his position on the turn order as far down as it can possibly go. All the while making sure you've made any necessary buffs or debuffs in the process. It's definitely a system where you'll have to take things slow, think things through, and finally execute. And with a visible turn order on the screen at all times, they'll always have a clear indication on who will take their turn and when. And it's a key component that allows players to organize their plan of attack. Take, for example, the certain actions that can subtly change the turn order, but can leave a drastic effect on how the rest of the battle unfolds. Actions such as the use of items will ensure that the person using that item won't have to wait as long until their next turn. And certain characters possess certain abilities that will also influence the next time the target will have their next opportunity to potentially fuck your shit up. Things like threaten and delay attack could make all the difference in what was once a perilous conflict. But on the flip side, enacting big moves can make it to where the character will have to wait even longer than usual for their next turn. There's always so much to consider with every passing turn you take, and it makes for an incredibly engaging and intuitive system. One that gifts players with a ton of agency, but enough in the way of enemy design to warrant critical thinking. And with the way this game's enemies were designed around this system, FF10 has easily some of the most strategic encounters in the series. And the thing that really makes everything regarding combat tick was the enemy design. The enemy designs lent themselves to the system so incredibly well, it's actually beyond words. Each enemy type has a weakness that at least one of your party members can exploit and take advantage of. Tidus handles faster enemy types, Wakka handles aerial types, Auron handles armor types, so on and so forth. This party is dynamic as hell, and have their own unique mechanics that can contribute to a satisfying victory. And with the aforementioned substitution mechanic in mind, you'll always have the tools and opportunities to deal with any predicament, especially during some of the tougher encounters where mastery of the swap and turn order mechanics is definitely recommended. You will have your ass curb stomped 16 times over, and as many times as I had in my first playthrough, if you don't familiarize yourself with these mechanics. If you're going into this game thinking it's just another strongest move equals win ordeal, you'll certainly be humbled. You'll find yourself trying to adapt to situations through substituting characters in a number of ways. Situations that can change in an instant. Situations that will have you rethinking your entire strategy instantaneously. Unfortunately, those situations won't arise very often, if ever, throughout much of the early to mid portions of the game. Yeah, truth be told, Final Fantasy X is a game that starts off so goddamn slowly. And when I say that, I don't just mean the way the first few hours acts as a glorified tutorial. I mean, yeah, that's still an issue that hinders replay value a bit. But I was mainly referring to the rather underwhelming series of battles that last until you leave Macalania. Before a very particular event that I won't spoil just yet, much of the enemies you face are just palette swaps of enemies from the area you just came from. It's still relatively early in the game, I get it, but the first few hours of this game felt like it was holding my hand. You'll find yourself facing off against groups of 3, comprised of a flyer, quickie, and a toughie, and at certain times an elemental flan. More times than you can possibly count. It gets very exhausting and boring and easy and predictable, and not a great way of preparing you for the really tough encounters that happen once you actually leave Macalania Forest. I can understand why people like to bring up the difficulty spike argument with this game, more so than other Final Fantasies, because, wow. When the going starts to get tough, the tough going starts to get. Yeah, one thing that will always bug me about this game is this incredibly rigid difficulty curve. Like I said before, the first third or so of the game are made up of battles that could be concluded within 5 or less turns. I reiterate, you're pretty much fighting the exact same types for several hours straight. But then suddenly, you're fighting this huge fucking tank that'll pull out this big fuck you move, and you're helplessly sitting there like, well, golly gee whizzers, I sure shit wasn't ready for this. And well, that's because you weren't. I've beaten this game a number of 5 times as of writing this, so I know all the intricacies within the bosses and how they operate. But man, during that fateful first playthrough, I was not prepared. This game didn't do a good job of preparing me for it. It was very fucking sudden. But enough groveling, because I actually do think that Final Fantasy X has an array of just incredibly well-designed bosses. All of the mechanical and strategic jargon I yapped about earlier really reaches its peak when these bosses find themselves amongst the equation. And it's not just because of their more methodical nature, but it's because of yet another new mechanic rearing its head and making high-stakes encounters feel all the more grand and cinematic. And, again, strategic. Almost every major boss in Final Fantasy X possesses a sort of context-dependent gimmick that you can interact with, which is a nice change of pace when compared to the more, I guess, brute force bosses of previous entries. No, Final Fantasy X takes a thankfully more puzzle-oriented approach, where emphasis is placed on set gimmicks, and survival is dependent on how well you can manipulate them to your benefit. Enabling these commands hosts a number of benefits, but enough downsides to keep things interesting throughout the carnage. Like, moving the airship away from this dragon thing will allow you to avoid an attack that poisons your entire party, but it will also allow them to swoop in and potentially one-shot your party if you're not careful in how you manage the airship. And given that only Tidus and Riku can give the commands, it gives a player the incentive to think carefully and move the airship when they are absolutely certain it will pose a benefit of some sort. And this is just one example of a boss encounter that will keep you on your toes at all times through these command gimmicks. Another will have you positioning yourself on this board so you're out of the enemy's range of attack. This one is made all the more brilliant with the boss's ability to inflict berserk, meaning you're stuck there and you're completely fucked over until the ailment is cured. Certain other bosses will have talk options that will grant the user a stat boost as well. One will have you balance in negative and positive ailments to avoid getting one-shot, while also keeping your HP at a certainly decent level as well. Yeah, the bosses are fucking fire. Some of the aforementioned fuck you moves are a little annoying, and you'll sometimes be forced to sacrifice an Aeon to tank damage. But outside of that, FF10 is arguably the strongest lineup of bosses in the series. There really isn't a single one that I don't enjoy fighting now. They have creative mechanics and a good amount of options you can use against them, such as limit breaks. Limit breaks are back and, in a literal sense, better than ever. They've been renamed overdrives, but their effect is largely the same as earlier interpretations of the mechanic. But there's a couple of things that put the overdrive several steps above the limit breaks of 7 and 8. First and foremost, each overdrive comes with a minigame that determines how the overdrive will function. Tidus is all about timing. Get the cursor within the colored area and boom, big damage and more attacks. Hit outside of the area following timer expiration, and you might as well have just used the attack command. Line up 3 colored slots in a row to reach max potency with the selected element. Line up a variety of them to get something interesting.
Get arthritis.
These minigames add an extra element of engagement to the overdrive system, and the influence they leave on the attack's properties can make them incredibly satisfying to use. Unnecessary addition that makes them all the more instrumental during tougher encounters.
Except for oh my god, my fucking finger, oh my god!
Yeah, okay, like seriously, I thought that Mario Party on the N64 taught us the dangers of quickly rotating the joystick. I guess SQUARESOFT didn't listen to the complaints, I guess. Well, fuck us and our opposable thumbs, I guess. Anyway, the second notable aspect of the overdrives are the option to customize how you earn them. This was the wise decision to end all wise decisions. I fucking love whoever's idea it was to inject this into the game, because it gives me so much agency and control over this system. You're no longer stuck having to take damage to earn an overdrive. No, now you have the option to earn it in whatever way you choose. You're free to customize it any way you like, but for me, I like to give each character the most sensible ones. It makes sense to keep Auron at Stoic because he's a tank of the party, and it makes sense to give Yuna healer because, well, that's pretty fucking obvious. Speaking of Yuna, her overdrive is the simplest but arguably the most beneficial. Instead of being granted with some big bitch slap to the enemy, the first Aeon she summons will automatically have a full overdrive gauge of their own, which is just an incredible way to put the final nail in the coffin some of the game's hardest boss fights. There's just so much to gush about when it comes to a battle system such as this. And if we were to label it the greatest one in all of RPG history, I wouldn't begrudge. Matter of fact, I might even agree with you. It's got all the components that make for an excellent system and then some. It's innovative, it attempts to redefine and shake up some of the genre's tropes, it's heavily strategic and rewarding, it's dynamic, there's an unforgettable lineup of bosses, just everything about it is great. Except for one teensy-weensy little thing that made me want to cry. With a mechanic as gigantic as the substitutions, there's bound to be at least one drawback of some sort. And the drawback here lies within the way it rewards AP to party members. As per usual with RPGs, characters will receive experience so as long as they take a single action in combat. At first you realize, okay, cool, I can just bring them in for one turn so they can receive experience? That's really convenient. But it won't take long until you start to go, aw man, I have to bring them in for just one turn so they can receive experience? That's really fucking tedious. This is something I feel works better with a game like Pokemon, but for a game like FF10, it doesn't make as much sense. And that mainly comes down to one thing, and that thing being the fact that a lot of the battles don't call for a specific character to be used. Like, why the hell would you need Yuna when you're fighting this pitiful pack of beasts? Easy, so she has an excuse to gain experience. It quickly got to the point where forcing an unnecessary character into battle became cumbersome and overall just detrimental for the character's growth. And again, it drags out a fight that would have otherwise been taken care of within seconds. But no, send out Lulu and her Moogle to do chip damage so she can get her due experience. Whoopee! This is lame as fuck. What the game could have done to help circumvent this issue was to have a minimum set number of AP that the entire party would be rewarded with, regardless of their direct participation in the battle. On the upside though, further AP will be given depending on how much they contributed to the battle. Give them a bonus for ending the battle, but make sure everyone gets their fair share. It'd make the process of leveling a whole lot less annoying, now that you won't have to arbitrarily shove someone into battle, for the sake of scraping up some AP that they'll be able to spend on this wonderful spear grid. Oh my god, this is the greatest progression system I have ever seen in an RPG. I'm not even being facetious here. I genuinely, wholeheartedly believe that the spear grid is unbeatable. I do not believe that it gets any better than this. Chalk it up to senseless laud and all you want, but the fact of the matter is that the spear grid is as organic and customizable as an RPG leveling system gets. What a fantastic way of breaking up the traditional leveling system. Instead of characters gaining experience levels, they're instead awarded with a move on the spear grid. Meaning that, yes, all basic stat increases are tied to the spear grid, and each stat type has their own designated node. Which can come off as obtuse at first, but I don't know, man. There's just something about it that makes it so goddamn satisfying. Maybe it's the adorable little shimmering sound when you unlock a node. Maybe it's the added satisfaction of stats being actually unlocked. Or maybe it's just the strong elements of choice and experimentation. Honestly, the sheer amount of customization at your disposal is ludicrous. And the expert spear grid included in the remastered versions are even more insane. Seriously, the amount of character building potential with the system can lead to each and every playthrough feeling entirely fresh in comparison to the previous. There is so much in the way of endless customization that you have the option to undergo a variety of unique builds for specific runs. One run in particular that I found was this one from Sack, where they would literally swap the classes of each and every character, and still manage to beat the goddamn game somehow. Yeah, the spear grid is kind of fucking brilliant when you really put it into perspective. There's enough freedom of choice, but at the same time, you're still naturally progressing throughout the story. And the really unique thing about this system is that, again, each character will have a specific job assigned to them. It's a sort of best of both worlds when it comes to the flexibility of 7 and 8 and the class system of 9, where each party member had their own distinct traits and attributes. Every character plays a unique role in battle, but you're able to dictate how each of them grow, thanks to the completely interchangeable nature of the sphere grid. I mean, the whole thing is made up of one tangible interconnected pathway that pose basically zero limits in how you access and navigate it. Really, your only roadblocks are these little level up, level 1, level 2 sphere grids or whatever. But behind them lies some pretty consequential nodes, like some pretty strong goddamn abilities.
Double cast anybody?
Each character does have a specific chunk of the board, made up of stat and ability spheres catering to them, but this opens up the opportunity to have other characters cross over into those spaces and snatch some of those stats and abilities for themselves. And with things such as the teleportation spheres and friend spheres to consider, you'll have a ton of tools at your disposal to experiment with and create a build that you can be proud of. Maybe. Getting back to the point I just mentioned, granting certain abilities to multiple party members isn't just fun on a surface level, but it can have a legitimate strategic advantage as well. The best example by far is to give Yuna some of Lulu's black magic spheres and watch the ungodly amounts of damage it will inflict on the poor, helpless creatures you're fighting. With Yuna being assigned to the white mage class from the start, she'll have a high magic output, but it mainly be used towards healing and shit like that. Well, what if I told you that you could easily hop on a Lulu's side of the grid, snatch up some of her spheres, and basically transform her into an unstoppable force? But hey, isn't there a character who would have a much easier time collecting Lulu spells? A certain someone I haven't mentioned in this video just yet? A cat, perhaps? A dragoon blue mage of sorts? Yeah, Kimari kinda sucks. I get that he was made to be the one-size-fits-all of the party, but he just doesn't work. Not for me, at least. His main gimmick is that his aura shards are learned from fiends, but that's about all he's good for. Pretty much anything he can do, another party member can already do much better. He's got a ton of variety that you can easily access, but his lackluster stats render it all obsolete. He's really the only party member in the game where I hardly ever felt the need to use him. He's just lacking the unique tools to make him handy in particular scenarios. Even Riku has the ability to one-shot Machina enemies with steel and mug. Kimahri got nothing. Sorry, kitty. Wait a minute, what did any of that have to do with the sphere grid? Absolutely nothing? Absolutely correct. I just thought that Kimahri sucked and felt this was a somewhat necessary time to bring it up. But hey, at least he has a badass design and some of his overdrives are pretty useful. Anyway, getting back to the sphere grid. It's fun to move around in, it's satisfying to unlock new shit, it's flexible while maintaining a sense of linearity. God fucking damn it. I knew I had to bring this up eventually. Yeah, unfortunately, Final Fantasy X made a rather unfortunate shakeup with the game's structure. Open-ended exploration of the overworlds within the previous entries had been replaced with completely straightforward navigation, devoid of almost any exploration at all. You'll find the occasional branching path that leads to a treasure chest, but outside of that, the game's structure is entirely linear, which is lame as fuck. Especially when you consider how much the overworlds really enhance the immersion factor of the JRPG genre, not just Final Fantasy. They gave each game that used it a sense of interconnectivity within the world around you. When you have the freedom to openly explore that world around you, it really breathes a ton of life into the game, and that sense of adventure is all the more tangible, which is an element that gets lost when much of the game is reduced to walking throughout repetitive, narrow corridors. But to give out some credit, I will say that the story does provide an at least decent enough reason for its linearity. The characters are on a pilgrimage, so it would make a whole lot of sense to backtrack or do anything besides simply head into the next location. And despite it being so straightforward, the world in each of its settings do feel pretty dynamic and lived in, and the world building is up to snuff in comparison to most Final Fantasies. I simply wish for a bit more open-endedness. Don't just wait until the calm lands for everything to open up. Let that be the template for the overworld or something. But if there's one thing this game's linearity affected the most, it would be the side quests. Or rather, how you access them. In my review of Final Fantasy IX, I lauded the Chocobo Hot and Cold side quests for allowing the player to get a head start at it during the early portions of the game. More importantly, the structure of the game's story allowed you to take routine trips throughout. Much of the game's side quests followed suit, but in Final Fantasy X, the game doesn't open up until you're roughly 60% of the way through it, which doesn't grant any opportunities for side quests throughout a very good portion of the game. And as a result, a lot of the minigames and side quests will have to be crammed in toward the latter half of the game. This is especially obnoxious with the fiend hunting side quest, where you're forced to do nearly the entire damn quest all in one go. And to add insult to injury, the airship doesn't even feel like an airship anymore. And it's such a shame too, because acquiring the airship was always the highlight of every Final Fantasy game. It's when you know for a fact that shit's getting real, and you're really ramping up to save the world. It's awesome and dopamine inducing each and every time. But nah, Final Fantasy X is like, bruh, menu, pick a world and go there. Yeah, the airship in this game is just a fucking menu. It's literally just a menu. I mean, the UI is at least nice. If I made a video game, I would design my menu around this UI, I guess. But how can I get excited for an airship I don't even get to control? Lame. A lot of these issues I feel wouldn't exist if the game were just a little more open. This linearity just kills a lot of the interactivity that makes Final Fantasy and JRPGs in general so immersive. Getting back to the side quests, I don't think any amount of openness could have saved them from being... I don't think any openness could have... I don't think they could have saved them from... I don't think they could have saved them from being complete fucking dog shit. Yeah, sorry, but I don't find the side quests in this game to be all that good. I would actually take it a step further and say they're some of the weakest in the entire series. I don't think all of them are stinkers, fortunately. For instance, I think the Albed Primer quest was pretty cool. It's one of those side quests that you keep track of as you progress throughout the game, kind of like the Turtle Paradise flyers in 7. The major difference, however, is that the former ties into the story in a really intriguing way. A second playthrough is pretty essential in order to really see what makes the side quests work, because during your initial playthrough, You're obviously not going to understand what any of them are saying, but should you actually collect all the primers, then hop into a second playthrough, you'll start to see that the writers hid away some important story details behind this made-up language. And now that you have the ability to understand what it is they're saying, you can just sit back and go, oh, well, isn't that something? Subtlety. I love it. It's such a simple little addition, but the ironic thing is the fact that it's my favorite side quest in the game. Yes, something that doesn't influence like the combat or stats or abilities the characters learn is my favorite side quest in the game. Huh. Isn't that so? But does that speak to how much I enjoy the side quests or how bad the other ones are? Well, it's the latter. It is absolutely the fucking latter. Fuck these side quests, man. They're arduous, have ridiculous requirements, force you to play minigames that are either just poorly designed or just a terrible idea to begin with. They suck ass. Like, who in their right mind thought that dodging, no joke, 100 lightning strikes in a row would make for a fun minigame? I mean, if it were something like the jump rope from Final Fantasy IX, where it was this purely inconsequential thing that meant absolutely nothing, I could have at least brushed it off. But when you make it an absolute necessity to acquire a character's ultimate weapon, that's when it starts to become an issue. A lot of the quests for obtaining the character's ultimate weapons are of a similar category, by the way. Just obnoxious as hell minigames that make you wonder how anyone on the team thought it was a good idea. But the thing that sucks the hardest is the minigame requires you even begin the side quest in the first place. You see, in order to unlock the thing needed to power up your ultimate weapons, you only need to train a chocobo and win a variety of different races. The chocobo's training can straight up go screw itself. I fucking hate it with a screaming passion that burns so hot, it'll melt the ozone layer in seconds. The chocobo races in 7 were mostly just alright and serviceable enough, but the same cannot be said for, this. Not even close. And the thing it mainly comes down to is how the chocobos control. It is about one of the worst control schemes I have ever seen, hands down. Why in God's name wouldn't you give a racing minigame full analog control? We were on the PlayStation 2, for fuck's sake. DualShocks have been a thing for a few years now. Why are the controls still like this? Hell, never mind the lack of fully analog control, the damn chicken runs around like the bastard's been decapitated. It's like it never moves in the direction you actually want it to. Instead, it'll constantly pivot in the opposite direction, much to your annoyance. Not to mention the fact that the final challenge is a timed obstacle course where hazards are constantly flying in your face. Are you fucking serious, man? A timed obstacle course with this control scheme? What kind of bullshit is this? You might have noticed the lack of footage for the side quests, and that's quite simply because I just didn't have the patience to slog through it again. I quite literally just went, nah, I'm good. I've already done it once. I don't need to do it again, ever. And so many of these quests are just tedium incarnate. The butterfly chases, for instance, like who actually enjoys this shit? Why is it some mandatory thing for every Final Fantasy to have the most mentally draining minigames in game history? 7's chocobo breeding was annoying because of its stupid RNG. 8 had the arduous Brothers GX quest. 9 had the card game with a vague, perhaps even arbitrary rule set. And man, I would take any of those over a vast majority of the side quests in 10. They absolutely dropped the ball here. Harder than they did in any of their other games. Blitzball's alright though, speaking of balls. It's a very not for me thing because I feel it's too much of a random numbers game for me to really get engaged with it. But for what it is, I suppose it's fine enough. And the music for it goes harder than a motherfucker, like. Ooh boy, you need some more drum and bass in my video games. Like the drum and bass production and those wailing guitars, that shit goes hard, man. However, I will say that the introduction to Blitzball was odd. They gave you this ridiculously lengthy tutorial, one you can thankfully ignore, before forcing you into a game that's practically impossible to win. And I say practically impossible because I managed to emerge victorious, bitch! Then Luca goers can go in Luke on a... Here's Waka hitting an overtime goal to clinch a victory. How fucking sweet is that? I mean, this was a genuinely prophetic way of winning this match, and I feel as if it could be canon or something. Or maybe not, because Waka's team, the Besaid Oryx, are quite literally the Final Fantasy equivalent of the Miami Marlins. But either way, it's just perfect. This was perfect. I was screaming. You want to know what isn't perfect, however? The Fiend Hunting Quest. Or as I like to call it, not that good. It's one of those side quests where the key element is RNG. Yay! I love RNG. Meaning you're going to spend a dubious amount of time getting a painfully specific fiend to appear so you can capture it. Yeah, that's a nicer way of putting it. Yeah, it's not very fun at all, and it's made even worse by the fact that you have to revisit all of the locations throughout the game and capture every type of fiend present. And by then, you're well past the point where one shot on enemies is guaranteed. Like, why not toughen the fiends up a bit? Or do something to justify all this backtracking? But that doesn't happen, and sadly, this winded up being yet another side quest that's boring, tedious, and way too time-consuming. Thank Yevon for the Aeon battles, because those are actually fun. Fun in a lot of the same ways Pokemon is fun. Intense one-on-one encounters where you will adopt much of the same strats as your average RPG, but with the added urgency that comes with a one-on-one battle. With switching out Aeons to adapt to enemy weaknesses and such, being another key component for victory. Pretty neat addition altogether. Mechanically, they serve their purpose well, but visually, oh hell yeah, the summon and overdrive animations are fucking spectacular. I don't even care if they go on for an entire minute. They're just... look at this shit. Like, goddamn. Speaking of which, this game has some of the best presentation in any RPG ever. If Final Fantasy VII was considered a big jump from the SNES to the PS1, then Final Fantasy X is a fucking pole vault into the stratosphere. Many consider the jump from the PS1 to the PS2 the biggest upgrade between two console generations in the medium's history, and it's not hard to see why. Especially when you're looking at the comparisons between FF9 and 10. Like, keep in mind that these two games were released a year apart. A single year. It's not as insane of an upgrade as, say, Metal Gear Solid to Sons of Liberty or GTA 2 to GTA 3. But the presentation undoubtedly got a huge makeover thanks to the PlayStation 2's newfound processing power. Man, back then, this was the shit. But enough about technicality, because yes, while this game is visually impressive on an objective level, it's a distinct visual style that sets it above many of its contemporaries, even to this day. Final Fantasy X has, without a shred of doubt, my favorite art style in the series. This tropical science fiction crossover aesthetic is always a pleasure to look at, and the sheer visual variety in each location you visit just makes everything feel so alive. Besaid and Kilika are your typical beach setting, albeit the former takes place on more mountainous terrain. Meanwhile, Luca takes a lot of cues from those two locations, but feels comparatively more science fiction, what with the Blitzball Stadium being there and all. And the really colorful and well-detailed textures were instrumental in furthering the heart and soul of each area you visit. Each area is beaming with its own distinct color palette, and details subtly integrated to give them each a sense of visual storytelling. One fine example that comes to mind is the Macalania Woods. This combination of blue and green branches with the shimmering lights overlooking it all is just mesmerizing. Ooh boy. Makes me glad I got a 1440p monitor. And basically every location in the game follows suit in some fashion. And the game is just good looking from a technical perspective as well. The lighting and geometry is so good from a modern perspective, but I can only imagine what it was like to see it all back in 2001. But I was just a dumb fucking infant back then, so what could I have known? Anywho, there is no discussion of FF10's visuals without at least acknowledging the elephant in the room. And it's a rather shameful elephant, because this issue I'm about to discuss is persistent in the most accessible version of the game, and the one people recommend the most. Yeah, you know what, I don't want to dance around it any longer. The remaster sucks ass. It sucks knowing that this is, for many people, the only way to experience this game. It sucks because the face models and facial expressions have been neutered like crazy. What's funny about this is that I don't even have to explain anything, because the problems with the remaster's facial reconstructions are damn self-evident. Just take a look at this comparison, and unless you're coping or just fucking blind, you should be able to decipher the vast difference in quality. I'm not entirely sure what went wrong with Square Enix when they were remastering this game. I mean, it's not like they just forgot to have characters emote. Then again, stuff like this makes you really sit back and wonder the same thing for all the other botched remasters. What is the actual cause for shit like this? The best conclusion I can muster is that this remaster was pretty damn rushed, and the game-breaking bugs that come with the Steam version are just a cherry on top of a pretty messy remastering job. Luckily, I can just emulate the original PS2 version, which is what I've been doing this whole time if you actually couldn't tell. But man, for my first 3 playthroughs of this game, I had to put up with this remaster. And again, it's a shame because it's just another instance of a woefully inferior remaster that came over a decade since the game's initial release. Do I think that the remaster is unplayable and something you should avoid? No, I don't think that. It's just that this recent playthrough of the original version really shone a light on how bad the remastered character models are, for lack of a better word. But enough stalling, because we need to talk about one good thing the remaster gave us. No, I'm not talking about the Eternal Calm, because the lore ended when the game did. There was absolutely nothing that came afterward. No sequel, no nothing. No, I'm talking about the rearranged soundtrack. One thing I absolutely love about remasters and remakes, something I wish people would highlight more often, is a remade OST, but with the option to listen to the original one as well. There are many cases of developers adhering to this little desire of mine, such as the Master Chief Collection and Spyro Reignited Trilogy. Meanwhile, others just leave you with the inferior recreations. Yeah, sorry, I don't want to hear the awful, flat, no dynamic have-an-ass, horribly mixed recreation of the Uematsu dorm theme every 10 minutes of Persona 3 Reload. Let me have the option to listen to the original, goddammit. I don't care if you're chilling on my bed. Fuck out of here. Anywho, getting back to Final Fantasy X, I think there's an argument to be made for both versions of the OST. If you're asking me personally, I'm going with the original. Hands down, all fucking day. But if you had told me you would prefer the rearranged version, again, I wouldn't begrudge. I think they're damn fine recreation of the original material, and they accomplish everything a rearranged soundtrack should. Update the original scores, but with modern production values and some new little details here and there. That's all you need to do. Nothing more, nothing less. But again, I still prefer the original because of the itch that it scratches, and how it better captures the charm and spirit of the game. But there is one particular track that I am less than fond of. It's a track that's pretty damn important to the game, as you'll likely hear it roughly 1,000,000 goddamn times. Hell, you hear it within the opening minutes of the damn game. You think I'm stalling too much? Probably. Anyway... yeah, Otherworld kinda sucks, fam. Now, I don't mean to sound like a big music geek who knows all the ins and outs of music theory and shit like that, but I do consider myself to be pretty deep into extreme metal and simply heavy music in general. Hell, I've covered the genre in a few of my videos, so from that alone, you could probably ascertain what it is I don't like about this song. To my ears, Otherworld is just one big cliche. You know the really cringeworthy impressions of death metal people make with no knowledge of the genre? Yeah, that's pretty much Otherworld in a nutshell. The riffs are pretty weak, and the guitar tone is too clean for it to work. But really, it's the vocals that are the main offender here. I don't know what the hell the vocalist is trying to do during the verses, but what I do know is that it sounds like ass. You can just hear that awful digital processing on the growls, which makes it kinda difficult to listen to. Not to mention the ridiculously brick-walled mix of the song. It's comparatively more compressed than the rest of the soundtrack, which is fucking baffling. Did the composers behind this game think that metal must be loud? It's metal, it has to be loud. Even if it is through awful digital compression and not dynamics or anything of the sort. God, I just don't like Otherworld. Especially since you're going to hear this track on loop several times, especially on the first playthrough. No spoilers because I haven't reached that part of the video yet, but if you have played the game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, Otherworld is a lame and tacky mess of a song, but thankfully it's just one sore thumb on an otherwise soft, gentle pair of hands. And I'll take a godly OST with one bad track, as opposed to a more all-around boring and uninteresting one. Anyway, the flaws regarding audio don't stop there because, ooh boy, we've officially reached that part of the video. It took us nearly an hour into my script, but motherfuckers, we've made it. Anyway, Final Fantasy X was the first of many things for the flagship franchise. It was the first to have 3D animated backgrounds, the first to utilize the power of the internet, the first to have full voice acting.
You wanna try that move one more time?
Did I say the first to have full voice acting?
What do you want to do?
Did I say the first to have full voice acting?
I wanted to see Yuna's statue too, but I wanted to see it with Yuna by my side.
Did I say the first to have full voice acting?
Hey.
Ha!
Did I say... Yeah, okay, I'm done with this bit. Anywho, yeah, unfortunately the English dub of this game is pretty rough around the edges. That bit just now might have indicated that I sort of hate the voice acting or think that it sucks, but I don't think that at all. So fuck off, bitch. Hell, I'd say it's a great way to experience the story. I've only heard tidbits of the Japanese version, so I can't make too many comparisons, but regardless, I still think that the dub delivers enough emotion and communications of its themes. The performances themselves are worth noting too. They're not the best, but they are convincing enough to make the more emotional moments really work. And this isn't surprising at all, because of the star-studded cast here. I mean, shit, you got James Arnold Taylor, John DiMaggio, Tara Strong, Cree Summer, Quentin Flynn, Tom fucking Kenny. Yes, Tom fucking Kenny. SpongeBob's on this shit.
High Summoner O'Holland used to play for them. A big name to live up to.
This cast is every 2000s kid wet dream, and the performances are, again, pretty solid. Waka's stereotypical Jamaican accent, Tidus's constant refer to Jack as his old man, and some of Yuna's monotone delivery are issues worth noting. But still, the voice actors knew precisely when to sound serious, when to sound anguished, when to goof off, etc. And again, the emotional baggage of FF10's narrative is not lost in this dub. So what exactly is the issue here? Well, judging by those clips I just used, the problem should be obvious. You see, back before we had the technology to quite literally alter lip syncing and facial animations in cutscenes, localizers had to find other means of making sure the dialogue matched the character's mouth movements. They'd put awkward amounts of space in between words, tack on unnecessary "ya knows" and "I thinks," speed up or slow down audio, the list goes on. And it results in a lot of the dialogue sounding weird and disjointed. I know that Japanese is an intricate language and it's statistically the fastest spoken language, but many other dubs, even at the time, were finding other ways to compensate for that without it coming off as amateurish. Cowboy Bebop, the original run of Trigun, Yu Yu Hakusho, Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2. These were all Japanese media from the same time period as Final Fantasy X, all of which were adapted in the English language. All of which are generally considered better than their Japanese counterparts, or at the very least on par with them. Meanwhile, Final Fantasy X is just a weird product of its time. From a general standpoint, it's still pretty good, and it gets across the story's sentiment well enough. But man, are its imperfections staggering. And on that note, we finally got to everyone's favorite portion of every Final Fantasy review. The portion where I get to discuss its narrative. Oh yeah, bitch. I'm especially excited to discuss this one in particular because I genuinely consider it to be the most tightly written plot in the entire series thus far. And much of my praise towards it stemmed from the rather basic storytelling fundamentals that this game masters with relative ease. We're not going to delve into any of the themes or any of the characters just yet. No, instead I would like to take a few minutes to analyze this narrative from a purely storytelling perspective. I'm not entirely sure if I've done something with this in any of my other reviews just yet, but no other game I've covered thus far warranted a segment such as this. No other game I've discussed really mastered those core fundamentals of a good story quite like FF10 did. The pacing, the structure, and the sheer scope of it all is fantastic. But the thing that really gets me, and the thing that made me want to give it its own segment, is its use of foreshadowing. Final Fantasy X is a game of twists, turns and shocking revelations that will surely give the player the same reactions as the characters. And a plot twist is only as good as the foreshadowing leading up to it. And in the case of Final Fantasy X, the foreshadowing is incredibly nuanced, with a ton of small details players will pick up on with each replay. But before I delve into said details, allow me to inform you all that spoilers are about to begin and will persist throughout pretty much the remainder of the video. If you haven't played this game yet, or you just don't care about what I have to say about the story for some reason, you can use this timestamp here to skip it all. All good? Everyone gone? Okay? Good. As you may already know, it's eventually learned that Yuna's pilgrimage will result in her death once she summons a final Aeon. All that tireless journey and then fighting with the end result of her death, regardless of whether or not she actually defeats Sin. The role of Summoner is nothing short of a suicide mission, and how it's revealed comes off as a genuine shock to the players, not because it comes out of nowhere, but because it allows us to reflect on how the game was built up to this very moment. You see, prior to this reveal, the game was constantly implying this sort of thing during numerous cutscenes. The context clues given throughout those early portions of the game were subtle enough to the point where the player wouldn't have thought anything of it in the moment. But simultaneously, said clues were strong enough to give the players a lot to think about in hindsight once Megaton Truth Bomb was dropped on our heads. There are a handful of examples to choose from, but the two that really stuck out to me the most were when the ship left Besaid, and in Kilika, when Tidus inquires Lulu about this end she alludes to that's pretty damn cryptic when you think about it. I love these two scenes because they're the two biggest pieces of evidence for the true nature of the pilgrimage, yet they both feel completely inconsequential on your first playthrough. With the initial departure scene, you'll see a crowd of people waving goodbye like normal, but amongst them, there's a good number of them shedding tears and shit, looking much more sad than someone normally would in this situation. What's the big deal? The player and Tidus will think to themselves. She'll eventually defeat Sin and return home, right? As for the Kilika scene, this one is less heart-wrenching but still as impactful nonetheless. Tidus and Lulu are discussing the role of the Summoners, and their guardians, to which Lulu states that the latter does anything they can to protect the former, in a way that is, again, much more depressing in hindsight of the context we learn later on. When this line drops, you'd more than likely start to feel the least bit worried, especially with the way Lulu delivers the line with an uncomfortable silence to coincide with it. Tension rises. Tidus asks Lulu what the hell she meant by the end. The aforementioned silence lingers. A sense of discomfort hangs in the air. And then, boom. All that tension gone, just like that. The players and Tidus can carry on. It's a very brilliant and well-composed scene that perfectly personifies how the writers were able to give an emotional gut punch to scenes that originally didn't have much or any at all to begin with. But it also highlights another thing I loved about this story: how the writers used exposition. Normally, scenes with endless explanations behind everything get pretty tedious, and it's a problem in a lot of story-centric video games. Fortunately for Final Fantasy X, the writers made the brilliant move of using their clueless protagonist to justify said exposition. The writers were able to use in-universe logic to provide exposition in a way that felt completely reasonable. You see, Tidus doesn't know where the fuck he is. He was an isekai boy before isekai boys were even a thing. Within hours, he went from the anime Lionel Messi to a castaway 1,000 years in the future. So, naturally, he'll want to start figuring shit out. Shit that is painfully rudimentary and common knowledge to the people of this world he's now lost in. But you see, here's the kicker. Tidus has a perfect excuse in his back pocket that he can use every time to circumvent any insults or dirty looks he'd receive for asking such dumbass questions. Sin is so powerful that his mere presence can give a bitch amnesia. Fucking awesome. This hardly matters in the grand scheme of things, but it's just another example of the writers using basic storytelling fundamentals in a way that are unique in certain areas while downright brilliant in others. And speaking of our boy Tidus, I'd gladly make the argument for him being the single most misunderstood protagonist in the franchise. Tidus has the unfortunate and frankly pretty ridiculous reputation of being annoying, being a constant nuisance to the player, that sort of thing. And I just do not get it, man. I mean, I can at least somewhat understand the complaints toward his voice, but to be honest, it shouldn't take long until you're used to it. Anyway, I think Tidus is an amazing protagonist. Not my favorite from the franchise, but he's still a great character nonetheless. I like to view him as a sort of extension of the player going through this experience for the first time. Remember, Tidus is just as blind as you are. He's putting the pieces together at about the same pace as you are. Any questions or concern you have, Tidus also has, and vice versa. The game was able to build up this sort of psychological connection between Tidus and the player, and it is just fantastic. But the best quality Tidus has, without question, is his perseverance. Throughout the story, Tidus receives bombshell after bombshell in the form of plot twists. Learning that his father is Sin, and knowing you have to fight and potentially kill him. Learning that Yuna is on a textbook suicide mission, in spite of all these promises he made to her. Learning that, upon Sin's defeat, he will cease to exist. The way all this information culminates would leave your average person in complete shambles. But not Tidus. He always found some sort of way to keep going, in spite of everything that happens throughout the game. And this perseverance even rubs off on some of his friends, particularly Yuna. Yuna is another example of a character whose biggest strength doesn't lie in their powers and abilities, but rather their sheer unbreakable will. Actually, that's not taking it far enough. She's the example of this. Imagine going through a quest that will 100% result in your death guaranteed, all while having a massive chip on your shoulders, following her father's legacy, but with a death sentence twist. How fucked up is that? But Yuna still manages to not merely brush off the sin to the side and pretend everything's okay. No, she actually embraces these dire circumstances and carries on happily. Yuna's story is of both inspiration and pure poignancy in its most endearing form. One that teaches you how to put on a bright face in the darkest of days. Nobody in Spira has it rougher than our friend Yuna, but simultaneously, nobody in Spira is happier, and she does everything she possibly can to make everyone else feel that same happiness. Even if it's for a measly decade, Yuna stands her ground and pushes forward with no regrets. And her connection to Tidus assures her that she is not alone in this predicament. Because you know who else is forced to live in their father's footsteps? Tidus and Yuna are in the same league, in the sense that the accomplishments of their fathers are what defines them, and they are constantly reminded of the fact. But there is quite a bit of contrast between the two, which opens up a lot of opportunities for the two to understand each other and develop their relationship. After all, from the perspective of Tidus, Jecht was an abusive alcoholic, who put his ego above all else. But to Yuna, Jecht is a hero, and so is her father, Braska. And I gotta say, anytime the two discussed to unpack their father's hat on them, it made for some of the most humanizing moments in the entire game. Yuna assures Tidus that Jecht was a good and brave and humble man, who was instrumental in bringing the calm, but she knows that she can't change Tidus' mind. But on the other hand, Tidus hates Jecht's guts, and never shies away from expressing that hatred. He scoffs at the idea of Jecht being this hero that saves Spira, but deep down inside, Tidus can at least open up to the idea that Jecht became a better person. Keep in mind that this is all before Tidus discovers who Sin really is, but we'll get to that. For now, I'm going to continue to gush about Tidus and Yuna because damn is this one fine romance. One of my favorite romances in gaming, to be quite honest. They're two characters brought together by their differences, and thus are able to learn from each other. We've already went over how they're connected through their fathers, but the glue that really binds these two together is the contrast between their worlds. Yuna's world, Spira, kinda fucking sucks, and is stuck in a perpetual state of never-ending suffering and misery. Meanwhile, Tidus' world, Dream Zanarkand, is pretty much a utopia, where everyone is happy and able to fulfill their passions. Even after being made aware of their summoner's fate, Tidus is still steadfast in his will to bring Yuna to his Zanarkand. He wants Yuna to see a world that's not full of death, but rather one that's full of life, and he'll do anything to fulfill that desire. He'll find a way to defeat Sin, but in a way that's permanent. No more of this calm shit. Sin is finally down for the count. But egats, tragic irony has strucketh, because as it turns out, Tidus is a dream of the faith. So when Sin's gone, he's gone. Oh, this is awesome. I absolutely love this plot twist. Tidus was able to accept that after this pilgrimage, Yuna will be gone forever. Following the reveal of this twist, to the other characters, not to us, Yuna doesn't even have the chance to accept it. Tidus is all like, yeah, bye. I can't show you Zanarkand, I gotta go now. Goodbye. And then he disappears, and it's really sad. Yuna falls to his intangible body, thanks for him for what he's done. Oh, wait. No, that says I love you. This subtitle doesn't say anything about Yuna thanking him. What fucking gives, you asshole? Yeah, apparently in the Japanese version of the game, Yuna says thank you, or arigato, instead of I love you. And it sparked debates amongst the fanbase for what I can tell, since the game came out. I think there's a strong enough argument to be made for both, and I kinda see myself on the fence here. On one hand, thank you carries more weight and nuance, while I love you is just super poignant and a heartfelt piece of closure to their relationship. You really can't go wrong with either, but that's just my 2 cents on the subject. Anyway, Tidus and Yuna is a video game romance like no other. Their differences are what makes them feel connected, and there's so many great scenes and dialogue between them. The underwater kissing scene is not only a technical marvel, but it's by far the best expression of their love, both visually and thematically. Visually, it's obvious, they're kissing. But thematically, it just hits hard. In those few moments of nautical lovemaking, the two have just each other. No pain, no suffering, no Spira, no Xanarkin, no Sin, no Jekt, no YouTube video talking about them, just them. And it's beautiful. Speaking of which, Jekt is Sin, the gasp! But prior to that and his boss fight that once took me 4 hours to beat, no joke, Jekt was on a pilgrimage of his own with Braska and... Wait, is that fucking Orin? Yeah, Orin's time will come, but I want to analyze Jekt just a little bit more before I move on to the other party members. Throughout the early portions of the game, we learn about Jekt through flashbacks that detail the psychological abuse he inflicted upon a then 7-year-old Tidus. He berated him, made him feel small, made him feel weak. And Tidus justifiably resented him for it. But over the course of the game, Jekt begins to be portrayed in an entirely different light. We begin seeing a more humble and caring man, a stark contrast between how he was portrayed earlier. Turns out that Jekt was kind of a dumbass when he was still in Xanarkin with Tidus and his mom. He genuinely wanted Tidus to be strong, to be a good man, not just a good blitzer. But I shouldn't even have to tell you that he went about it in the worst possible way. Jekt's idea of strength, discipline build, and parenting is, bullying, to put it bluntly. Like, sir, that is a 7-year-old child. You sound like every other deadbeat dad dragging his kids around the local Costco in search of a packed blue ribbon six-pack. Anyway, over the course of his pilgrimage, Jekt expresses his sincere regrets over the way he treated Tidus growing up, and he really seems to have improved his way of life during the same Spira. He quit drinking, he acknowledges his bond with his son, and he genuinely tries to be better. Yeah, he's still the cocky hard-ass we already knew him to be, but the man had made a clear effort to change and make amends for his wrongdoings. He even went so far as to accept in the role of Final Aeon, hoping it would destroy Sin. But as we all know, he just ended up becoming the next Sin, and he needed Tidus to take a trip to Spira so he may kill him. He did all he could to better himself, but even then, Tidus couldn't bring himself to forgive his father. And Jekt acknowledges his fuck-ups and calmly accepts the damage he caused Tidus, and that it goes beyond mere forgiveness. It's a very powerful and moving scene that sets up the final boss of the game perfectly. I mean, you really couldn't ask for a better setup to your game's final boss.
Yes, I know Jekt isn't the final boss. Uematsu is. Let me have my moment. Shut up.
Yeah, Uematsu is a bit of an odd one. In terms of mechanics, he's, indescribable? You literally cannot get a game over, and the only attack he uses is deadly. But on a thematic level, it's amazing. The cherry on top of an anti-religious Sunday. Yeah, Final Fantasy X is a game about perseverance and personal connections, but it is also a game about organized religion, and the deceit and corruption that goes along with it. I personally adore the idea to reduce Uematsu, this once all-powerful controlling god, into this weird space cockroach incapable of actually killing its enemies. I adore it because it speaks volumes about how corrupt zealots are nothing but an empty husk if they have nothing to control over. Once you release your Aeons from Uematsu's control, you finally get to see him for what he really is. A weak little bug. Kick ass. Anyway, pretty much anything else revolving around Yevon is your typical behavior from these powerful political and religious figures. They scapegoat marginalized groups of people, use their technology behind closed doors, share the responsibility of causing everything bad in the world, just like the shit you see in real life. But I feel this is important to mention because there is one character who this religion affects the most, and that's Waka.
I go hard in the motherfucking paint!
Ooh boy, this is gonna be an interesting character study to say the least. Not only because his arc is good, but because we're dealing with a racist character. Up first on this channel, but certainly not the last. I hope. Anywho, upon his introduction, Waka never seemed to shut the fuck up about how totally awesome Yevon is, and how anyone who badmouths his precious religion is a heathen. Remember when I said that Yevon likes to use a particular race as her scapegoat for Sin's existence? Yeah, well, the race in question is the Albed, a group of mechanically inclined individuals who have been branded enemies of Yevon for, using Machina, I guess. Yeah, apparently Yevon likes to feed his followers a load of bullshit by saying Sin's existence came about through the use of this Machina, and Sin will just keep reappearing until the people of Sphere atone and stop using Machina. Right. And Waka believes every single word without a single shred of doubt. All the lies about the Albed, and all this crap about atonement. Yep, here comes the part where I call him a racist. And when I say racist, I mean like, wow. It's kinda shocking just how much deep hatred this man harbors for the Albed. Like, bro, without hesitation, drops slurs like he's in the Twitter comment section. His friends even have to hide Yuna's heritage away from him out of the fear of his reaction. Yes, Waka is so comically racist that the summoner he's protecting can't even talk about her lineage because everyone's afraid of what he'd do. But of course, any protagonist who starts off as a bad person or a person with bad qualities has room for growth and development. Right? Well, yeah. And that goes for Waka too. Remember Steiner from FF10? Yeah, that goofy knight toting his Make Alexandria Great Again helmet like nobody's business? Yeah, well, his character arc is really no different than Waka's. Now that I think about it, they're essentially two sides of the same coin. Two characters who swore utmost allegiance with their political religious figures, but learned to develop thoughts of their own and accepted things the way they were the hard way. Through their own experiences and a newfound companion they could place their trust in, they realized that they were kinda fucking stupid, and the things they supported so vehemently were a total sham. The major difference is here, however, that Waka harbored hatred toward a specific group of people, and surprise, surprise, Riku, the final character to join your party, is indeed one of those people. But the irony here is that Waka initially had no idea Riku was an Albed, which leads me to something I find to be both hilarious and thematically potent, intentional or not. For someone who despises the Albed as much as Waka does, his complete inability to recognize Riku as being one goes to show that bigots generally have very bad intel on the people they resent. People are told a bunch of lies and they just accept them as is, and it leads to situations like this where they're totally clueless. It's another way of communicating these themes of how blind compliance can cloud one's judgment, to the point where you can't even tell the person you're journeying with is a member of the race you're told to hate. Anyway, that was just a quick little ramble I wanted to inject real quickly. Back to the review. When Waka eventually discovers that Riku is an Albed, he predictably loses his shit and throws a temper tantrum. But it also kickstarts his development because shortly after this, he and the party travel to the Albed's home that's literally just called home, where he experiences the hardships the Albed face through his own eyes. The religion he once devoted his life to has his members ransacked this desolate, seemingly peaceful town, using fiends that come from Sin, you know, the entity they're literally trying to kill. Keep in mind that this was not long after he had found out that one of the Maesters started involving himself in some good old patricide. And not long after this, we found out that Yevon had been using Albed's technology this whole time, and had been playing their followers for a fool. These events happen one after the next with virtually no time to let it all sink in, and it shakes Waka to his core. He now has to cast aside his faith, and accept Yevon for what it is. A greedy, oppressive, and hypocritical cult. He acknowledges both the absurdity of fighting those individuals he once looked up to, as well as his determination to finally put an end to their bullshit. And it's awesome. Hell, that whole scene prior to the Unaleska boss was absolutely terrific. And I've got every detail fully memorized, not only because of how awesome it is, but because I've died numerous times in this fight. Anyway, the climactic nature of this scene is absolutely gripping. Everything the characters spent their pilgrimage learning led to this very moment. Putting our characters in the hot seat, where they, in the midst of uncovering the truth behind everything, have to forge a new faith. Everything they were led to believe turned out to be a fat lie, and now the party must find something new to believe in. The will to change the world. To fix the damage Yevon has caused. To rid Spira of this false hope that lives on a fixed schedule. Fuck 10 years. Spira needs to be free, damn it! Auron's speech is a mixture of rousing, triumphant, and just goddamn power. It always gets me hyped to fight Uematsu, even if she does inevitably curb stomp me. And I'll be forced to watch it all again, but still feel no less hyped than I did before. That's how you know he crafted a damn good cutscene. Anyway, this scene is everything. It's a perfect representation of the themes regarding hope, perseverance, and truth. Every character shines in it, with Auron being the undisputed MVP of the scene. This was certainly the moment that solidified himself as being the greatest character in this game, and one of the top 10 characters in the entire series. Again, it's this perfect balance between badass and inspiring, where he leaves his companions with two simple choices. Fucking incredible. Yeah, Auron is just a cool ass character all around. He is this amalgamation of everything that makes a character cool in my eyes. His attention-grabbing design, when paired with that stoic, albeit humble demeanor of his, is memorable in and of itself. But it's his method of guiding and influencing the other characters that really puts him on a pedestal. After all, he had been on a pilgrimage before, so he's well aware of his sin's true nature. His fellow guardian became Sin, and Auron was slain in the meantime. 10 years pass, Sin returns as Jecht, and now Auron must bring the son of Jecht and his friends on a journey to uncover the truth and put an end to Yevon once and for all. It perfectly gets across this idea that learning things through your own eyes is far more powerful than having it just be told to you. Auron could have easily just told him everything textbook style, but where's the weight in that? Auron knows that in order to finally cleanse Sphere of Yevon's corruption, you have to pull the wool from over the eyes of those participating in this folly. I really can't stress enough how incredible of a guide he was. He wants his comrades to know the truth, but at the same time, he allows them peace of mind to make their own decisions and to forge their own paths. And when we reach the aforementioned Uematsu scene, he inspires them to take their lives into their own hands and choose whether to confront your sorrow or die a fruitless death. I can actually feel myself getting goosebumps as I type this. What the actual fuck? Auron's he's just that guy, man. He's just that fucking guy, man. Every character in this game is that fucking guy or gal, man, woman. I know I didn't mention Lulu or Kamari all too much, but they're pretty strong characters too. I especially like the big sister role Lulu played in Yuna's pilgrimage. She might seem a little bitchy here and there, but that bitchy attitude is just a front for all the pain she carries. She's lost a lot of summoners over many pilgrimages. She just doesn't want another repeat of that tragedy, let alone one that involves a daughter of a previous high summoner, Kimari. This cast of characters is simply one of a kind. Not my favorite FF party, I believe I made that very clear who that was in my FF9 video, but still, great cast of characters, who are all part of a very great game, one that will always hold a special place in me for years to come. In retrospect, I kinda owe it a lot for just how much it influenced me to reach out and expand my tastes, on top of it just simply being a memorable experience in its own right. I'm glad to say that, even after playing so many different RPGs since my first time playing this, Final Fantasy X still holds up pretty damn well. It's a fun title to go back to every once in a while, thanks to its incredibly engaging combat system, impeccable world design, strong characters, and life-affirming themes. It's just too bad that a lot of the stuff on the side is of a lesser quality. The way I see it, Final Fantasy X is like going out to eat. Getting a fantastic entree, but the appetizers were undercooked and your drink has no ice in it. The main bulk of the game is undeniably fantastic, but yeah man, this is still the one Final Fantasy I've played where I just cannot feel compelled to do a vast majority of the side content. Still love the Yojimbo side quest though, that shit's a banger. But all in all, Final Fantasy X is nothing short of a great game. Maybe not quite a masterpiece due to some of its shortcomings, but the highs make this game worthy of recommendation, regardless of how experienced you are with RPGs. I'm feeling a solid 8 on Final Fantasy X. See you bitches later.
They say Seymour went to Macarena Temple.
Makalania Temple.
Yeah, okay, I take it back. Maybe the localization is, like, fucking perfect.